A gold coin does not need your belief to exist. A silver coin does not need a speech, a seal, a parliament, or a central bank. It only needs to sit there, heavy, cold, and silent. And that is enough. Paper money is different. Paper money survives only if an entire society agrees to participate in an organized illusion. A baker accepts it. A soldier fights for it. A citizen pays taxes with it. An empire borrows, expands, and survives through it. And from the moment humanity accepted that arrangement, money stopped being a neutral object. It became one of the most dangerous technologies of power ever invented. Because once money can be created from a promise, the thing being put at risk is no longer just price. It is trust, order, and the survival of society itself. Paper money looks like a downgrade in value. It is thinner than gold, weaker than silver, easy to tear, easy to burn, and nearly useless outside the system behind it. A metal coin can lie buried for centuries and still remain wealth. A banknote cannot. It survives only if society keeps believing, keeps accepting, keeps obeying. And that is where the paradox begins. The more fragile thing created the stronger structures. Paper money lets states tax more deeply, borrow on a larger scale, pay salaries more regularly, keep armies in the field longer, and project power far beyond the limits of a metal reserve. It made markets wider, credit denser, war more prolonged, and everyday life more tightly bound to a system of promises. Money no longer merely measured value. It began to organize society. Before paper money, exchange rested on metal. Gold, silver, coins, and bullion gave trade a foundation people could see, weigh, and trust. Value had mass. It rang on the table, disappeared into chests, crossed borders in wagons, and slept in vaults behind stone walls. For centuries, that seemed enough. But as trade widened, cities grew, and states reached farther across land and sea. Metal began to show its limits. It was heavy, slow, costly to move, and dangerous to store in large quantity. A growing economy needed more than wealth that could merely sit in a chest. It needed value that could travel faster than metal, scale beyond the mint, and keep pace with the world becoming larger, busier, and more connected. In Song China, the old logic of money began to strain under the weight of success. Commerce was expanding, cities were swelling, and goods were moving across distances that metal coinage handled poorly. Copper cash had served the economy for generations, but a larger market exposed its limits. It was bulky, slow, and burdensome in serious volume. For merchants moving goods across provinces, value had become too heavy to carry. So paper money did not emerge as a fantasy or as a trick. It emerged as a practical answer to scale. A promise on paper could do what strings of coins could not. It could move faster, travel farther, and support an economy already growing beyond the physical habits of metal. That was the deeper shift. Money was starting to detach from weight. And once value no longer needed to ride in chests, the structure of trade itself began to change. The first real change was easy to miss because it did not happen in the paper itself. It happened in the location of value. Under metal money, value lived inside the object. The coin carried worth in its weight, its material, its survival. Paper money moved value somewhere else. It turned money into a claim on a system. A note mattered not because the paper was precious, but because a wider structure stood behind it. Trust accepted it. Taxation absorbed it. Authority enforced it. That shift changed everything. Once value no longer had to live in metal, it could move through institutions, through records, through state power, and through the shared belief that tomorrow the promise would still hold. Paper money was never just paper. It was a social contract made portable and a political order made spendable.
Paper money did something metal never could do at the same speed. It reduced friction. Trade no longer had to drag its full weight across roads, rivers, and borders every time value changed hands. A note could move faster than a chest of coin. It could pass through markets with less delay, settle obligations with less strain, and connect buyers, merchants, lenders, and states across greater distance. That changed the tempo of economic life. Credit could expand more easily. Larger transactions became more practical. Commerce no longer had to grow at the same pace as the mint. It could outrun it. And that was the bright side of paper money. It did not just make exchange more convenient. It made the economy more scalable. It allowed trade, finance, and administration to operate at a size and speed that metal alone could no longer support. The dark side began the moment money stopped needing value inside the object. Once money became paper, the state was no longer managing metal alone. It was managing belief. A coin could command trust through weight. A note could not. It needed a wider structure to hold it up: law, taxation, enforcement, routine acceptance. And that changed the character of power itself. Authority became less visible, but more invasive. It no longer sat only in vaults, mints, and reserves. It moved into records, institutions, salaries, debts, and the daily habits of ordinary people. The deeper shift was not that paper money was fragile. It was that society became more dependent on organized confidence. From that point on, controlling money meant controlling the conditions under which millions of people agreed to trust tomorrow. In early modern Europe, paper money did not rise alone. It arrived with banks, credit, public debt, and the growing fiscal machinery of the state. This was the real turning point. Money was no longer tied only to metal in a vault. It was now tied to institutions that could borrow, record, promise, and tax at scale. A banknote was not just a lighter substitute for coin. It was part of a larger architecture that linked merchants to governments, lenders to armies, and finance to power. That is why paper money mattered so much in Europe. It grew alongside the modern state itself. As governments learned to issue debt, manage revenue, and finance war over long periods, paper claims became part of how authority operated. The deeper story was not convenience. It was capacity. Paper money helped build a world in which states could reach further, borrow longer, and organize society more deeply than metal alone ever allowed. The Bank of England revealed what paper money could become when it fused with state power. Founded in the shadow of war, it was not simply a bank in the modern sense. It was part of a new financial engine. Through notes, credit, and government debt, the English state gained something older empires had often lacked: a way to borrow at scale, fund war over time, and keep its machinery running even when coin alone would have fallen short. This changed far more than finance. It changed the endurance of power. Armies could be supplied longer. Fleets could stay at sea. Taxation, debt, and paper claims could be woven into one system strong enough to support imperial reach. That was the deeper significance. Paper money did not merely lubricate exchange. In the right institutions, it helped turn fiscal capacity into military capacity, and military capacity into empire. The deeper revolution of paper money was not only economic, it was social. Once value could exist as a managed promise, the relationship between the state and everyday life began to change. Wages were paid not just in money,
but in confidence that tomorrow the note would still matter. Savings became a bet on institutional stability. Debt became a bridge between present need and future income. Taxes became easier to collect, bonds easier to sell, and public finance easier to extend across time. Out of that world came something new. A broader middle class tied to salaries, savings, credit, and state-backed order. Paper money did not simply circulate through society. It helped reorganize society around financial promises. From that point on, ordinary life became more deeply connected to the health of institutions because pay, security, ambition, and social stability all depended on the same invisible thing: confidence held together at scale. The French assignats showed how quickly paper money could become dangerous once political order began to crack. They were born from revolution, backed by confiscated land, and presented as a solution to fiscal strain. For a moment, that promise seemed enough. But paper money does not survive on assets alone. It survives on confidence. And confidence is harder to preserve in a society already convulsing with fear, war, and power struggle. As the revolution deepened, the state demanded more, issued more, and trusted that authority could outrun doubt. It could not. Prices rose, trust thinned. Daily exchange grew more anxious. The problem was no longer only monetary, it was social. When people stopped believing the promise would hold, paper money began to lose not just value, but legitimacy. And once that happened, the cost spread far beyond markets. It entered kitchens, wages, savings, and the fragile bond between the state and ordinary life.
Paper money is strong for the same reason it is vulnerable. Its value does not live in the note itself. It lives in the promise behind it. When that promise is backed by functioning taxation, manageable debt, credible institutions, and political legitimacy, paper money can survive shocks that would seem terrifying from the outside. But once those pillars begin to weaken together, the fracture starts. The state collects less, owes more, commands less trust, and asks the public to keep believing anyway. That is the mechanism of crisis. Not paper first, but confidence first. Not printing as the root cause, but a system losing the ability to make its promises feel real. And when tax capacity, debt credibility, institutional order, and legitimacy begin to fail at the same time, paper money stops acting like money. It starts acting like doubt, passed from hand to hand. At first, paper money was only meant to stand in for metal. A note was valuable because it pointed back to gold or silver somewhere behind the curtain. It was not money in its own right. It was a claim, a receipt, a promise to redeem. But history rarely stops where it begins. Over time, that link to metal grew thinner, more strained, and more political. States discovered that what held a currency together was not only the gold in reserve, but the power to tax, to borrow, to legislate, and to make obligations settle in their own unit. That was the long transition from gold-backed paper to fiat. And it marked far more than a monetary adjustment. It marked a transfer of trust. Value moved away from redemption into authority. Money became less a doorway to metal and more an instrument of sovereignty. From that point on, the modern monetary order would rest not on what could be redeemed, but on what a state could compel, coordinate, and persuade an entire society to accept as real. In the 20th century, paper money entered its largest stage yet, the age of mass states. This was no longer a world of limited courts and small treasuries. It was a world of industrial war, national welfare, central banking, public debt, and governments responsible for millions of lives at once. Paper money made that scale possible.
It helped finance armies that fought for years, factories that ran for war, and states that promised pensions, salaries, subsidies, and social protection long after the guns fell silent. It also changed the rhythm of politics. Public debt could be extended further. Monetary policy could reach deeper into employment, prices, and crisis response. But this expansion came with a cost. The more society depended on paper systems, the more ordinary life depended on the credibility of institutions managing them. Paper money did not simply fund the modern state. It bound society to it, more tightly than ever before. At the human level, the power of paper money is easiest to see in the rhythm of ordinary life. When it is stable, life becomes legible. Prices hold long enough to plan around. Wages mean something from one week to the next. Savings feel like stored time, not exposed fear. A household can budget, a worker can wait for payday, and a shopkeeper can trust that today's price will still make sense tomorrow. But when paper money begins to shake, that rhythm breaks. Prices move before wages can catch them. Savings stop feeling safe. Small transactions become negotiations with uncertainty. The damage is not only financial, it is emotional, social, and political. People lose not just purchasing power, but confidence in the promises that organize daily life. And once that happens, money stops being a quiet background tool. It becomes a source of tension inside kitchens, pay envelopes, and the fragile trust that holds a society together.
Paper money changed everything because it asked society to do something older money never demanded on the same scale. It asked millions of people to live inside a shared promise. Under metal money, value seemed to rest in the thing itself. Gold and silver could be weighed, stored, buried, and trusted as objects. Paper money moved value somewhere harder to see. It placed value inside collective belief, institutional strength, and political order. That was the real revolution. A modern society no longer had to organize itself around metal in chests. It could organize itself around promises that circulated faster, reached further, and bound more people into the same financial logic. But that also meant the system became more fragile in a deeper way. Once a society lives by shared promises, trust is no longer a background detail. It becomes infrastructure. And when trust becomes infrastructure, money no longer just reflects society. It begins to govern the terms on which society holds together. The paper age did not end. It became more abstract.
Today, most money no longer even takes the form of paper in daily life. It lives as bank deposits, digital balances, settlement systems, and central bank reserves. But the logic is the same. Modern money still depends on managed promises, institutional credibility, and the power of the state to define what settles debt, pays taxes, and anchors trust. That is why the story of paper money is not a historical detour. It is the foundation beneath the present. The paycheck in a bank account, the mortgage on a household, the bond on a government balance sheet, the reserve asset inside a central bank, all of them belong to the same long inheritance. Value no longer needs metal, and often no longer needs paper, but it still needs belief organized at scale. The modern world did not move beyond paper money. It deepened its logic until entire societies began living inside systems made almost entirely of confidence.
Most people misunderstand paper money because paper is the easiest part to see.
The note, the printing press, the rising number on the price tag. These are visible, dramatic, and easy to blame. But monetary breakdown is almost never just a story about paper being created in excess. It is a story about a wider architecture beginning to fail. Taxation weakens. Debt grows harder to carry. Institutions lose credibility. Political authority stops feeling legitimate enough to hold competing interests together. And then the currency begins to show the damage. That is why "they printed too much" is usually an incomplete explanation. Printing is often the symptom the public notices first, not the deepest cause. The deeper cause is a state struggling to make its promises believable. Paper money only works when a society trusts the system behind it, the laws, the tax base, the budget, the debt market, and the political order enforcing them. When those pillars hold, paper can survive extraordinary strain. When they crack, the note becomes the messenger of a deeper fracture.
Most paper money systems do not collapse for the same reason collapsing would be too costly for the people running them.
Fragile does not mean doomed. It means managed. Long before a currency reaches open ruin, states usually begin to bend the system in quieter ways. They devalue, they restructure debt, they change convertibility rules, they pressure banks, they widen the role of central institutions, they absorb losses slowly enough to prevent panic from becoming total break. That is why paper money can look weak in theory, yet endure for decades in practice. It is supported not only by trust, but by intervention. And intervention is one of the great hidden stories of modern monetary history. The public often imagines collapse as a sudden explosion. More often, the system survives through controlled distortion. Pain is spread across time, across classes, and across balance sheets. Savers may lose, creditors may be trimmed, growth may slow, but the structure stays standing. That is why most paper systems do not shatter. They are repaired, stretched, and re-engineered again and again, because a managed compromise is usually less dangerous than a clean break.
Once money becomes paper, the central question changes. It is no longer, what is this made of? It becomes, who has the authority to issue the promise, define its value, and compel society to trust it? That is the real power hidden inside paper money. Under metal, value seems to belong to the object. Under paper, value belongs to the system that declares, enforces, and sustains belief. And that shifts the center of gravity of society. Money becomes inseparable from sovereignty. The right to issue currency becomes the right to organize debt, taxation, salaries, trade, and obedience in the same unit of account. This is why paper money is never just an economic tool. It is a political instrument. The deeper struggle is not over paper itself, but over who gets to write the promise, who must live inside it, and who pays when that promise is stretched too far. Paper money did not change just one part of society. It changed the scale on which society could function. It changed trade by letting value move faster than metal. It changed war by allowing states to fund conflict longer than their coin reserves would have permitted. It changed taxation by making revenue easier to collect, record, and extend across time. It changed credit by turning future promises into present power. It changed banking by moving finance away from storage alone and toward circulation, leverage, and coordinated trust. It changed the middle class by tying ordinary security to wages, savings, debt, and institutional stability. And it changed the state by giving governments a deeper reach into everyday life than older monetary systems could sustain. That is the true scale of the shift. Paper money did not simply improve exchange. It widened the operating range of civilization itself. From that point on,
Money was no longer just a tool inside society. It became one of the systems through which society was organized, expanded, and held together. In the end, paper money mattered because it stopped being merely money. It became circulation, coordination, dependence, and belief. It became the pulse that let trade move, the nerve that let the state reach, and the measure by which a society judged whether tomorrow still felt credible. Under paper money, value was no longer something people simply held. It was something they participated in together. Every wage paid, every tax collected, every debt extended, every price accepted became part of a larger act of collective trust. That is why paper money changed everything. It turned money from a thing into a relationship. And relationships can deepen, stretch, fray, or break. When the system holds, paper money feels almost invisible, like a quiet background rhythm beneath ordinary life. But when belief weakens, the whole structure becomes exposed. The market feels it, the household feels it, the state feels it. Because paper money is not only a medium of exchange, it is the shared confidence that allows a complex society to keep moving without tearing itself apart.
Paper money did not merely change the material of money. It changed the location of trust. Under older systems, people looked for value in metal, in weight, scarcity, and the stubborn physical presence of gold and silver. Paper money moved that trust somewhere harder to see and far more powerful. It placed trust inside institutions, laws, taxation, debt, and the authority of the state itself. That was the real turning point. Society stopped anchoring belief in what money was made of and began anchoring it in the structure capable of backing the promise. From that moment on, monetary history became more than a story of exchange. It became a story of organized confidence. And organized confidence can build trade, finance war, stabilize daily life, and hold entire nations together. But it can also fray. That is why paper money changed everything. It did not just alter how money looked. It altered the ground on which society decided what was real, what was owed, and what could still be trusted tomorrow.